A forgotten Omega nursing a lonely life in the forest takes in a starving pup she should have left to fate. But when 4 massive black wolves surround her cabin at dawn, she realizes someone has been watching. And they're not here to give her a warning. They're here to change everything. Beyoncé's hand trembled on the cabin door as she pushed it open. The hinges creaked, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over the forest. Every bird had stopped singing. Every insect had ceased its buzzing. Even the wind had died, leaving the air thick and heavy with waiting. For enormous black wolves stood in her clearing. They weren't like any wolves she'd ever seen. They were massive, easily the size of horses, their shoulders level with her chest. Their fur gleamed like polished obsidian in the morning light, and their bodies radiated power that made the air around them shimmer with heat. They stood in perfect formation, disciplined and coordinated, like soldiers waiting for a command. But it was their eyes that made Beyoncé's blood turn to ice. Golden eyes that held far too much intelligence. Eyes that tracked her every movement with predatory focus. Eyes that saw not just a frightened Omega, but something more. Something they'd come here specifically to find. Shadow whimpered in her arms, and one of the wolves' ears twitched in response. Beyoncé's Omega instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself as small and unthreatening as possible. But her legs refused to move. She stood frozen in her doorway, clutching the pup against her chest like a shield, knowing with terrible certainty that her quiet life had just shattered beyond repair. The largest wolf stepped forward. He moved with liquid grace despite his size, each step deliberate and controlled. When he reached the center of the clearing, he stopped and lifted his massive head, silver eyes locking onto Beyoncé's amber ones. Then he began to shift. The transformation was nothing like the clumsy, painful shifts Beyoncé had witnessed from younger wolves learning to control their change. This was seamless, almost beautiful in its efficiency. His body rippled like water disturbed by wind. Bones restructured without a single crack of protest. Black fur receded into bronze skin that stretched over powerful, battle-scarred muscle. Within heartbeats, a man stood where the wolf had been. He was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Tall, towering, really, with broad shoulders that spoke of raw strength and a presence that made the very air feel heavier. His black hair fell past his shoulders in thick waves, and those silver eyes, so unusual, so arresting, studied her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. Scars traced his chest and arms like a map of violence survived, of battles won. This was an alpha. Not just any alpha, but the kind that commanded entire territories. The kind that other alphas bowed to without question. The other 3 wolves shifted as well, revealing men who looked like they'd been carved from warfare itself. One was lean and sharp-featured, with eyes that seemed to calculate 1,000 possibilities in seconds. Another was broader, with a gentler expression that seemed at odds with his warrior's build and the medical kit strapped to his back. The third was cold and expressionless, his face a mask of stone that revealed nothing. "My name is Cade Blackthorn," the silver-eyed alpha said, his voice a deep rumble that resonated in Beyoncé's chest. He gestured to each man in turn. "Kale Shadowborn, my strategist. Rowan Ashwood, our healer and combat specialist. Marcella Stone, my second-in-command." Beyoncé's knees nearly buckled. Blackthorn. The name echoed through her mind like thunder. She'd heard stories about the Blackthorn pack her entire life, legends whispered with equal parts awe and fear. They were elite warriors who answered only to the High Council. Wolves who could end conflicts with their mere presence. A unit so powerful that even the most arrogant alphas thought twice before crossing them. And their alpha was standing naked in her clearing, speaking to her like she mattered. "We've been tracking the pup for 5 weeks, Cade continued, his silver gaze never wavering from her face. "Since the night his mother was murdered and he fled into these woods alone." The word murdered hit Beyoncé like a physical blow. Not died. Not killed in a challenge. Murdered. Which meant Phoenix's mother had been assassinated. Which meant there were wolves powerful and ruthless enough to target the Blackthorn bloodline. "His name is Phoenix," Cade said, and something flickered in those silver eyes, grief, quickly controlled, but impossible to hide completely. He's my brother's son. The last living heir to the Blackthorn line. Beyoncé's arms tightened instinctively around the pup. Heir. She'd been feeding and protecting an heir. A wolf pup so valuable that 4 elite warriors had spent 5 weeks searching for him. Terror crashed over her in waves. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice breaking. I swear I didn't know who he was. I found him starving behind that log. He was dying. I just wanted to help. I never meant to interfere with pack business or overstep any boundaries. The words tumbled out faster, desperate and pleading. Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any disrespect. I'll give him back right now. I won't cause any more trouble. I promise. She took a step forward, extending the pup toward Cade with trembling hands, her entire body shaking with the expectation of punishment. She'd been punished before for not being enough. For being too weak, too soft, too omega. Now she'd be punished for being too much, for daring to touch something precious that didn't belong to her. Please don't hurt me, she whispered, hating how pathetic she sounded, but unable to stop the words. I was just trying to help. Cade's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. The 3 other men exchanged glances that Beyoncé couldn't interpret. Set him down, Cade said quietly. Beyoncé's instincts screamed at her to refuse, to protect Phoenix from whatever was about to happen, but she forced herself to obey. She knelt on the damp grass and placed the pup gently on the ground, her hands lingering on his soft fur for one last moment. Phoenix sat there for a heartbeat, looking between Beyoncé and Cade with those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. Then he bolted toward the alpha with a joyful yip that made Beyoncé's heart clench. Cade dropped to one knee, and the transformation in his face stole Beyoncé's breath. The cold, intimidating alpha vanished. In his place was someone achingly human, vulnerable, and overwhelmed with emotion. He gathered Phoenix into his arms, burying his face in the pup's black fur. His massive shoulders shook, and Beyoncé realized with shock that he was fighting tears. Phoenix, Cade whispered, his voice raw and broken. You stupid, brave little fool. We thought we'd lost you forever. The pup licked Cade's face enthusiastically, his tail wagging so hard his entire body wiggled. He made happy, chirping sounds that spoke of recognition and love and home. Watching them together made something crack open in Beyoncé's chest. A bittersweet ache that was equal parts joy and loss. This was where Phoenix belonged. With family who loved him desperately. With warriors who could protect him from whatever darkness had murdered his mother. Not with a worthless, rejected Omega living in exile. She took a careful step backward, then another, preparing to retreat into her cabin and let them leave. To return to her isolation. To accept that even this small joy had never really been hers to keep. Where do you think you're going? Cale asked, his sharp eyes tracking her movement like a hawk watching prey. Beyoncé froze mid-step. You have Phoenix back now. You don't need me anymore. I'll just go inside and let you be on your way. Thank you for not being angry with me. Do you know why Phoenix survived when he should have died within days? Rowan asked, his gentle voice carrying unexpected weight. Beyoncé shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Because you fed him goat's milk every morning at dawn, Rowan said, taking a step closer. You kept him warm during that storm 3 weeks ago when the temperature dropped below freezing. You scared off a fox that tried to hunt him. You stood your ground against a coyote twice your size to protect him. Heat flooded Beyoncé's face, spreading down her neck. They'd been watching. They'd seen everything. Her desperate attempts to keep Phoenix alive, her loneliness laid bare as she talked to him like he was her only friend in the world, her pathetic need for connection and purpose. We watched all of it, Marcellus confirmed, his cold voice somehow not unkind. Every morning for 3 weeks. You never missed a single feeding, even when you were sick with fever last week. Beyoncé's cheeks burned hotter. They'd even seen that. The day she dragged herself outside despite chills and nausea because Phoenix needed her. Most wolves would have left him, Cale said, his calculating gaze assessing her like a puzzle to be solved. Would have seen a dying pup as nature taking its course. Not worth the effort or resources. Not worth the potential danger of becoming attached. But you chose differently, Rowan added softly. You chose compassion over convenience. You chose to protect something vulnerable even though you had nothing to gain from it and everything to lose if the wrong wolves found out. Cade stood then, still cradling Phoenix against his chest with one arm. He crossed the clearing in 3 long strides that ate up the distance between them, stopping just below Beyoncé's porch. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, a physical pressure against her skin that made it hard to breathe. Not threatening exactly, but absolutely undeniable. Like standing too close to a wildfire. He chose you, Cade said, his silver eyes holding hers with an intensity that pinned her in place. And so do we. The words didn't make sense. Beyoncé's mind scrambled to process them, turning them over and over, but they kept slipping through her understanding like smoke through fingers. I don't understand, she whispered. Phoenix needs a guardian, Cade explained, his deep voice gentle despite its power. Someone who will care for him as he grows. Someone who will see his value beyond bloodlines and politics and power plays. Someone who possesses true courage, the kind that acts despite fear, not because of fearlessness. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like respect. We want you to come back to the pack with us. As Phoenix's caretaker and protector. As a member of our unit. The world tilted violently sideways. Beyoncé grabbed the porch railing to keep from falling, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. No, she said automatically, the refusal bursting out before she could think. That's impossible. I was rejected. The Silver Creek pack deemed me worthless 3 years ago. They don't want me. They made that very clear. The pack that rejected you holds no authority over us, Cale said with a sharp, dangerous smile. We answer to different powers. And we don't share their pathetically narrow definition of worth. You kept the Blackthorn heir alive for 3 weeks with nothing but goat's milk, determination, and courage, Rowan added, his gentle eyes warm. That's not worthless. That's extraordinary. But I'm just an Omega, Beyoncé protested, her voice cracking. I can't fight. I can't defend myself. I'm weak. Everyone knows it. The elders said so in front of the entire pack. Strength comes in many forms, Cade said, his tone absolutely certain. Combat prowess is only one kind. You've already demonstrated another, the strength to protect what needs protecting, regardless of cost. That's rarer and more valuable than you know. You stood against a coyote to save Phoenix, Marcellus said, speaking fully for the first time. You're half that coyote's size and possess no combat training. You should have died. But you didn't run. You didn't hide. You stood your ground until it fled. That's not weakness, Cade said quietly. That's courage. And we need courage in our unit more than we need another fighter. Beyoncé stared at him, her entire worldview fracturing. Elite warriors didn't recruit rejected Omegas. Alphas like Cade Blackthorn didn't kneel before wolves deemed too weak to matter and offer them purpose. Yet here he stood, silver eyes steady and utterly certain, holding out an impossible future like it was already inevitable. I'm scared, Beyoncé admitted, her voice barely audible. What if I fail? What if I can't do what you need? What if I prove that everyone was right about me all along? Then we'll be there to catch you when you fall, Cade replied simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. That's what pack means, Beyoncé. You won't face anything alone anymore. That's not a promise. That's an oath. He shifted Phoenix to his left arm with practiced ease and extended his right hand toward her. The gesture was simple, but it felt monumental. An alpha offering his hand to an Omega. A legendary warrior offering protection to someone the world had deemed disposable. The morning sunlight caught on the scars across his knuckles, evidence of battles fought and won, of a life spent protecting others. Come with us, Cade said, his voice carrying a command that resonated somewhere deep in Beyoncé's bones, in the Omega part of her that recognized true alpha authority. Your life is about to change. Beyoncé looked at that outstretched hand. At the 4 powerful wolves who'd chosen to see value where others had seen only weakness. At Phoenix, who dozed contentedly in Cade's arms, finally safe and loved and home. She thought about 3 years of isolation. 3 years of believing she deserved nothing better than exile. 3 years of mere survival without meaning, existence without purpose. Then she thought about Phoenix's tiny heartbeat against her palms that first morning. About the way he'd looked at her with complete trust. About feeling needed and valued for the first time since her rejection. Maybe she was being foolish. Maybe this would end in more pain, more rejection, more proof of her inadequacy. But maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't. Beyoncé took a deep, shaking breath and placed her trembling hand in Cade's. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and steady and absolutely certain. His grip was careful despite his obvious strength, protective rather than possessive. Something fierce and protective blazed in his silver eyes. "Pack your things," Cade said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "We leave within the hour. Your old life ends today." Chapter 3: Return of the Rejected Omega. The packed territory looked exactly as Beyoncé remembered, and that somehow made it worse. The main village sprawled across a valley clearing, wooden structures arranged in careful hierarchy. The Alpha's lodge dominated the center, surrounded by council members' homes, then warriors' quarters, then everyone else in descending order of importance. At the very edge, barely visible, sat the Omega shelters where she'd once lived before her rejection. Beyoncé's stomach twisted as they crossed the territorial boundary. Phoenix trotted beside her, occasionally pressing against her leg as if sensing her distress. Cade walked on her other side, his presence both comforting and terrifying. The other 3 warriors formed a protective formation around them. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Beyoncé Reed? The rejected Omega? What's she doing here? Look at her, walking with the Blackthorn unit like she belongs. Pathetic. They must have taken pity on her." Each word landed like a physical blow. Beyoncé kept her eyes down, her shoulders hunched, trying to make herself as small and unnoticed as possible. But there was no hiding. Not when she walked beside Cade Blackthorn himself. They passed through the market square, and the crowd parted like she carried disease. Some wolves turned their backs deliberately. Others stared with open contempt. A few young pups pointed and giggled until their parents shushed them with harsh whispers. "Steady," Cade murmured, his hand briefly touching her lower back. The gesture was subtle but grounding. They'd almost reached the warriors' district when a voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "Well, well, the weakling returns." Beyoncé's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. Would know it anywhere. Astrid Silvermane emerged from a nearby building, her beauty as sharp and cruel as ever. Tall, with silver blonde hair that cascaded down her back and ice-blue eyes that held nothing but malice. She was high-ranking, powerful, and had made Beyoncé's life miserable before the rejection. Now, seeing Beyoncé return, her smile turned predatory. "I heard rumors," Astrid purred, circling them like a shark scenting blood. "But I didn't believe them." The Omega who couldn't even stand her ground during her presentation ceremony, now playing nursemaid to the Blackthorn heir? She laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. "How desperate must you be?" "Move along, Astrid," Marcellus said coldly, but the woman ignored him. "Tell me," Beyoncé Astrid continued, stopping directly in front of her. "Do they know what you really are? Did you tell them how you froze during your ceremony? How you couldn't even meet the elders' eyes? How you proved yourself worthless in front of the entire pack?" Heat flooded Beyoncé's face. The memory burned like acid. Standing before the elders, trembling so badly she could barely speak, her Omega nature overwhelming her until she'd collapsed in submission. The pack had watched her failure. Had witnessed her weakness. "That's enough," Cade said, his voice dangerously quiet. But Astrid wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper meant only for Beyoncé. "You don't belong here. You never did. And everyone knows it." Then she deliberately knocked into Beyoncé's shoulder, sending her stumbling backward. The basket of supplies Cale had given her earlier spilled across the ground, food scattering in the dirt. Laughter erupted from the watching crowd. Beyoncé dropped to her knees, gathering the spilled items with shaking hands. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. A low growl made everyone freeze. Phoenix stood between Beyoncé and Astrid, his small body tense, his fur bristling. The growl that rumbled from his chest was far too mature, far too threatening for a pup his size. His golden eyes fixed on Astrid with unmistakable challenge. Astrid's face paled. Threatening an Omega was one thing. Threatening the Blackthorn heir was something else entirely. "We're done here," Cade said, his tone brooking no argument. He helped Beyoncé to her feet, his touch gentle despite the fury radiating from him in waves. "Move." They completed the walk to the warriors' quarters in tense silence. Cade showed Beyoncé to a small room adjoining his own, simple but clean, with a window overlooking the training grounds. Phoenix immediately claimed the bed, curling into a ball with a satisfied huff. "Rest," Cade said. "We'll talk later." The moment he left, Beyoncé collapsed against the door. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. She'd been foolish to hope this could work. Foolish to think she could return to a place that had rejected her so completely. She didn't hear the footsteps pause outside her door. Didn't know that Cade stood there, his hand raised to knock, listening to her quiet crying. After a long moment, he lowered his hand and walked away, his jaw clenched tight. The next morning, Beyoncé woke to the sounds of training. Through her window, she watched the elite unit run drills, their movements precise and deadly, their coordination flawless. They moved like a single organism, anticipating each other's actions with practiced ease. She spent the day caring for Phoenix and avoiding everyone else. But by afternoon, hunger drove her toward the communal kitchen. She moved quickly, keeping her head down, trying to be invisible. "You're doing it wrong." Beyoncé jumped, nearly dropping the bowl she'd been filling. Rowan stood in the doorway, his expression gentle but assessing. "The cowering," he clarified. "You're making yourself smaller, hoping they won't notice you. But that only confirms what they already believe, that you're weak." "I am weak," Beyoncé whispered. "No," Rowan said firmly, moving closer. "You're scared. There's a difference. Weakness is having the strength to act and choosing not to. You don't have that luxury. You've never been given the training or opportunity to develop that kind of strength. But that doesn't make you worthless." He handed her a small package. Inside were herbs and bandages. "For Phoenix," Rowan explained. "But also for you. You're stronger than they want you to believe, Beyoncé. Don't let them convince you otherwise." That evening, Kill appeared at her door with fresh supplies. "Better food, warmer blankets, toys for Phoenix." "Cade's orders," he said simply. But his sharp eyes held something that might have been approval. "You're packed now. That means you're provided for." 3 days passed in similar fashion. Beyoncé cared for Phoenix, avoided the pack, and endured whispers and cruel stares whenever she ventured outside. Each day felt like walking through fire. On the 4th day, she made the mistake of going to the market alone. Astrid was waiting. "Still here?" The woman sneered, blocking Beyoncé's path. A small crowd gathered immediately, sensing confrontation. "I thought you'd have run back to your pathetic cabin by now." "Please," Beyoncé said quietly. "I'm just getting food for Phoenix. I don't want trouble." "Too bad." Astrid stepped closer, her voice rising so everyone could hear. "Because you're trouble. You're a stain on this pack. A reminder of weakness we should have eliminated years ago." "Move aside," Beyoncé tried, but Astrid grabbed her arm. "Make me Omega." The challenge hung in the air. Everyone knew Beyoncé couldn't fight, couldn't defend herself, would crumble under any physical confrontation. "I said move," Beyoncé repeated, her voice shaking but steady. Astrid's hand cracked across Beyoncé's face. The slap echoed through the suddenly silent market. Beyoncé's head snapped to the side, pain exploding across her cheek. She stumbled, tasting blood. The crowd held its collective breath. Then a voice cut through the silence like a blade of ice. "Touch her again." Everyone turned. Cade stood at the market's edge, his silver eyes blazing with fury so intense the air around him seemed to shimmer. He moved forward with predatory grace, and the crowd parted instantly, wolves scrambling to get out of his path. "I dare you," Cade continued, his voice deadly quiet. "Touch her again and see what happens." Astrid's face strained of color as Cade stopped directly behind Beyoncé, his presence overwhelming and absolutely lethal. Under the Alpha's protection, Astrid raised her hand for another strike, fury twisting her beautiful face into something ugly. The blow never landed. Cade's hand shot out, catching Astrid's wrist mid-swing with a grip that made her gasp in pain. His silver eyes blazed with a fury so cold it burned, and when he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable weight of Alpha command. The kind that made every wolf within hearing distance instinctively lower their heads. "Touch her again," Cade said, each word precise and deadly, "and you answer to me." The market had gone deathly silent. No one moved. No one breathed. The air itself seemed to freeze under the weight of Cade's authority. Astrid's face had gone white. "Alpha Blackthorn, I was just..." "Just what?" Cade's grip tightened, making Astrid whimper. "Just assaulting a member of my unit? Just challenging my authority by harming someone under my direct protection." "She's just an Omega," Astrid stammered, desperation creeping into her voice. "She's worthless." Cade interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, "is more valuable than you will ever comprehend. And she is mine to protect." The possessive declaration rang through the market like a bell. Beyoncé felt it resonate in her chest, in her bones, in the Omega part of her that recognized the absolute certainty in his claim. Cade released Astrid's wrist, and she stumbled backward, cradling her arm. "Spread the word," he said, his voice carrying to every watching wolf. "Beyoncé Reed is under Blackthorn protection. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or disrespects her will face me directly. Am I clear?" Silence. Then, one by one, wolves began to lower their heads in submission. "Am I clear?" Cade repeated, and this time his alpha power rolled out like thunder. "Yes, Alpha," came the unified response. Cade turned to Beyoncé, and the fury in his expression melted into something gentler. He touched her bruised cheek with careful fingers, his jaw clenching when she flinched. "Come," he said quietly. "You're moving." By nightfall, Beyoncé found herself in a new room, larger, warmer, located in the heart of the Warriors' district rather than on its edge. Windows overlooked the central square, and the door was reinforced with iron. A statement as much as protection. "No one will touch you here," Cade said, setting her few belongings on the desk. "This section is patrolled constantly. You're safe." Phoenix immediately claimed the bed, but that night, he climbed onto Beyoncé's chest as she lay staring at the ceiling. His small weight was comforting, his steady breathing a reminder that she wasn't alone, that something needed her. The next morning, Rowan appeared at her door. "Come with me," he said simply. He led her to a quiet building filled with herbs, bandages, and medical supplies. The scent of lavender and sage hung in the air, calming despite Beyoncé's nervousness. "You saved Phoenix with instinct and compassion," Rowan explained, spreading various plants across the table. "Now I'll teach you the knowledge to back it up. If you're going to be his guardian, you need to understand healing." Over the following days, Beyoncé learned to identify medicinal herbs, create poultices, recognize symptoms of common ailments. Rowan was patient, his gentle instruction never making her feel stupid for not knowing. He treated her like a student, not a burden. "You have good instincts," he told her one afternoon as she successfully prepared a fever-reducing tonic. "Trust them." Marcellus was less gentle. Again, he barked as Beyoncé tried and failed to break his hold for the 7th time. "I can't," she gasped, frustrated tears burning her eyes. "Can't or won't." Marcellus released her, his stone face revealing nothing. "You don't need to be a warrior, Beyoncé. But you need to know how to survive long enough for help to arrive." Again. By the end of the week, she could execute a basic escape hold and knew where to strike to cause maximum distraction. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever known before. She began to notice things about Cade she'd missed before. The way he settled disputes with cold fairness, never favoring rank over truth. How he carried the weight of leadership like physical burden, his shoulders tight with stress he never voiced. The way he checked on Phoenix every night before retiring, his expression softening in ways it never did during the day. And the way he looked at her. It started with brief glances across the training grounds. His silver eyes would find her watching, and something would pass between them. Recognition, awareness, something unspoken but undeniable. The glances grew longer, more frequent. One evening, Beyoncé found him on the balcony outside the Warriors' Hall, silhouetted against the sunset. She should have walked away, but something drew her forward. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. Cade turned, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something warmer. "Too much to think about. The council meeting tomorrow?" Among other things. His gaze held hers, and the air between them seemed to thicken. "How's your face?" Beyoncé touched her cheek, where the bruise from Astrid's slap had faded to a pale yellow. "Better." Rowan's salve helped. "Good." Cade moved closer, and Beyoncé's breath caught. He was always intense, always overwhelming, but this felt different. More intimate. "You're adjusting well. Learning fast." "I have good teachers," she managed, hyper-aware of how close he stood. Close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his eyes, count the scars across his knuckles. "Beyoncé," he started, his voice rougher than usual, then stopped. Something warred in his expression, duty and desire, control and longing. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Cade reached out, his hand hovering near her face like he wanted to touch her but didn't trust himself to stop there. Then Phoenix bounded onto the balcony, breaking the tension with a playful yip. Cade stepped back immediately, the moment shattered. "It's late," he said, his voice carefully neutral again. "You should rest." Beyoncé nodded, not trusting her voice. As she turned to leave, she could have sworn she heard him whisper, "Not yet." Over the following week, the pattern repeated. Stolen glances during training. Hands brushing during dinner. Conversations that lasted longer than necessary, both of them finding excuses to remain near each other. The unit noticed. Cale's knowing smirks, Rowan's gentle encouragement, Marcellus's grunt of approval. The tension between them built like a gathering storm, inevitable and electric. Beyoncé was helping Rowan inventory supplies when it happened. The alarm horns shattered the afternoon peace, 3 long blasts that made every wolf freeze. "The attack signal." "Rogues," Rowan said, his face going hard. He thrust a medical kit into Beyoncé's hands. "Get to the shelter. Now." But through the window, Beyoncé could see chaos erupting at the village perimeter. Wolves shifting, warriors running toward the commotion, and her blood turned to ice. Phoenix was playing near the training grounds, directly in the path of whatever was coming. "Phoenix," she screamed, already running. Behind her, she heard Rowan shout her name, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. That pup had chosen her. Had trusted her. She wouldn't abandon him now. She burst through the door just as the first rogue wolf broke through the perimeter, massive, scarred, and heading straight for Phoenix with murderous intent. The alarm horns wailed across the village, but all Beyoncé could hear was her own heartbeat as she ran toward the danger, toward the pup she'd sworn to protect, with nothing but determination and a medical kit to defend them both. Chapter 5: Blood Moon Attack. The rogue wolf was massive. Easily the size of Cade, with matted fur and eyes that held nothing but bloodlust. It charged toward Phoenix with terrifying speed, jaws open, ready to kill. Beyoncé didn't think. She threw herself between them. "Phoenix, run!" she screamed, spreading her arms wide despite the terror flooding her veins. The rogue skidded to a halt, surprised by her sudden appearance. For one heartbeat, they stared at each other, predator and prey. Then chaos erupted. The northern gates exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Dozens of rogue wolves poured through the breach, their howls splitting the air. The village descended into pandemonium. Warriors shifted mid-run, children screamed, and the scent of blood began to fill the air. The rogue in front of Beyoncé lunged. She dove sideways, grabbing Phoenix and rolling. Claws raked across her shoulder, tearing fabric and skin. Pain bloomed white-hot, but she kept moving, kept running toward the shelters where other pups huddled in terror. Inside, everyone inside, she shouted, herding 3 young wolves ahead of her. A mother clutched her infant, frozen with fear. Beyoncé grabbed her arm. Move. No. Behind them, the sounds of battle intensified. Snarls, screams, the wet sound of teeth meeting flesh. Beyoncé didn't look back. Couldn't look back. She had to get these pups to safety. She practically threw them into the shelter entrance, counting heads. 6 pups. 3 mothers. 2 elderly wolves too frail to fight. All terrified, all looking to her for guidance. Stay here, she commanded with authority she didn't know she possessed. Don't open this door for anyone except the elite unit. Do you understand? They nodded, wide-eyed. Beyoncé turned to leave, but one of the mothers grabbed her bleeding arm. Where are you going? The healers will need help. The healing hall was chaos incarnate. Wounded warriors poured through the doors faster than the 3 healers could treat them. Blood pooled on the floor. Wolves groaned in pain. One healer, an older woman named Sarah, looked close to tears as she tried to stop a warrior's arterial bleeding while 2 others screamed for attention. I need help, Sarah cried. I can't, there's too many. I'm here, Beyoncé said, rushing forward. She grabbed supplies from Rowan's training sessions, her hands moving on instinct. Tell me what to do. Pressure on this wound. Don't let up no matter what. Beyoncé pressed down hard, ignoring the warrior's scream. Around her, more wounded arrived. The other 2 healers were drowning in casualties, their movements becoming frantic and disorganized. Someone had to take control. Listen to me. Beyoncé's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone froze, staring at the Omega who'd just issued a command. We need triage. Sarah, point to the critical cases. Those are priority 1. Moderate wounds wait. Minor injuries treat themselves or wait outside. You can't just, one of the healers started. Do you have a better system? Beyoncé snapped. Because people are dying while we argue. Sarah's eyes widened, then hardened with determination. She's right. You, sort the incoming wounded. You, prepare bandages and tourniquets. I'll handle surgery. Beyoncé, you manage the moderate cases. The system worked. Barely, but it worked. Beyoncé moved between patients, applying everything Rowan had taught her. Pressure for bleeding. Elevation for shock. Herbs for infection. Her hands shook, her shoulders screamed with pain from her own wound, but she didn't stop. A teenage wolf stumbled in, his leg mangled. Please, he gasped. My sister. She's still out there. You can't help her like this, Beyoncé said firmly, guiding him to a bench. Let me stabilize you, then the warriors will find her. She worked with desperate efficiency, tying off the worst of his bleeding, splinting the broken bone. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep him alive until Sarah could do proper treatment. More wounded arrived. An elderly wolf with claw marks across her chest. A child who'd been trampled in the panic. A warrior missing half his ear. Beyoncé treated them all, her mind focused on a single goal: keep them alive. Through the windows, she glimpsed the battle. Cade and his unit fought like demons, their coordination flawless, despite the overwhelming numbers. Cade himself was a force of nature, his silver wolf larger than any other, his jaws crushing throats and breaking spines with brutal efficiency. But the rogues kept coming. A crash made Beyoncé spin around. Phoenix had followed her from the shelter, his golden eyes wide with fear. And behind him, a rogue had breached the healing hall's back entrance. No! Beyoncé grabbed the nearest thing, a metal tray, and threw it at the rogue's face. It hit with a satisfying clang, making the wolf snarl and turn toward her instead of Phoenix. Time slowed. The rogue crouched, ready to spring. Beyoncé had no weapon, no training, no way to win this fight. But she stepped in front of Phoenix anyway, prepared to die if it meant he lived. The rogue leaped. A massive black wolf intercepted midair, tackling the rogue sideways. Marcellus. He tore into the rogue with savage precision, ending the threat in seconds. He shifted just long enough to growl, "Protect the pup. We'll handle the rest." Then he was gone, back into the battle. Beyoncé scooped up Phoenix, her whole body shaking. That had been too close. Too close. "Stay with me," she whispered into his fur. "Don't leave my side again." The battle raged for another hour, though it felt like days. Beyoncé worked until her hands were numb, until blood soaked through her clothes, until she couldn't remember what it felt like to not be terrified. She organized, directed, treated, comforted. When supplies ran low, she sent runners for more. When a patient panicked, she held their hand and promised they'd survive. 14 wolves came through the healing hall's doors on the edge of death. 14 wolves walked out alive because Beyoncé refused to let them die. Finally, blessedly, the alarm horn sounded 3 short blasts. All clear. Beyoncé sagged against the wall, Phoenix still clutched in her arms. Every muscle screamed. Her shoulder wound had reopened, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. But they'd survived. They'd all survived. The door burst open. Cade strode in, covered in blood. None of it his own, his silver eyes scanning the room with desperate intensity. When they found Beyoncé, relief so profound it was almost painful flooded his expression. "You're alive," he breathed, crossing to her in 3 long strides. His hands cupped her face, tilting it up so he could examine her. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she managed. Everyone else is alive because of you," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying across the hall. She organized the entire triage system, treated at least a dozen patients herself, saved that boy's life when the rogue broke in. Cade's silver eyes darkened with something Beyoncé couldn't name. Pride? Possessiveness? Something deeper? "The rogue leader?" she asked. "Dead," Cade said flatly. "I tore out his throat myself." The words should have been horrifying, but Beyoncé only felt relief. One less threat. One less monster who could hurt her pack. Her pack. When had she started thinking of them as hers? The night passed in exhausted blur. Beyoncé helped settle the wounded, checked on the pups in the shelter, and finally allowed Rowan to properly treat her shoulder. The claw marks were deep but clean. They'd scar, but she'd survive. She fell asleep in a chair beside Phoenix's bed, too exhausted to make it to her own room. Dawn came too quickly. A sharp knock woke her. Cale stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "The council has summoned you," he said quietly. "Now." Beyoncé's stomach dropped. "Why?" "They didn't say." But something in Cale's tone warned her to be careful. She followed him through the village, hyper-aware of the wolves who stopped to stare. Some looked grateful. Others looked resentful. A few looked actively hostile. The council chamber was located in the Alpha's Lodge, a massive room with high ceilings and walls lined with the pack's history. 7 elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions carved from stone. At the center sat Elder Matthias, the same elder who declared her worthless 3 years ago. Cade stood to one side with his unit, his silver eyes tracking her every movement. "Beyoncé Reed," Elder Matthias said, his voice cold and formal. "You have been summoned to answer for your actions during last night's attack." Answer for? She'd saved lives. She'd organized the healing efforts. She'd protected Phoenix. What could they possibly? "You assumed authority you were not granted," another elder continued, a woman with steel-gray hair and merciless eyes. "You gave orders to ranked healers. You commanded warriors to bring you supplies. You acted as though you possessed status you do not have." The words hit like physical blows. They weren't grateful. They were angry. Angry that an Omega had dared to lead. "I was trying to help," Beyoncé said quietly. "People were dying." "That is not your place to decide," Matthias replied coldly. "You are here as a caretaker to the Blackthorn heir. Nothing more. Your actions last night overstepped that role significantly." The injustice of it burned like acid in her throat. She'd saved 14 lives, had risked her own repeatedly, and they were punishing her for it. Cade stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. Beyoncé acted with courage and intelligence when our official healers were overwhelmed. She saved lives that would have been lost otherwise. If anything, she should be commended, not condemned. That is not for you to decide, Alpha Blackthorn, Matthias said coldly. This is a pack matter. She is under my protection, Cade growled, his alpha power making the air itself feel heavier. Which makes her very much my matter. The elders exchanged glances. Tension crackled through the chamber like lightning about to strike. Elder Matthias leaned forward, his eyes cold and calculating as they fixed on Beyoncé. Tell me, Omega, he said softly, dangerously. Do you believe you possess the right to lead wolves who are your betters? Council trial and the rise of the Omega. Beyoncé's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet Elder Matthias's cold gaze. I don't believe I'm better than anyone. I just did what needed to be done. What needed to be done, Matthias repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. And you determined this how? Through your vast experience? Your rank? Your authority? He leaned back, his expression carved from ice. Or perhaps you simply forgot your place. She saved my son's life. A warrior stepped forward from the watching crowd, his face still bandaged from the attack. When the healers said he was too far gone, she refused to give up. She kept him breathing until Sarah could operate. He's alive because of her. And my daughter, another voice called out. A mother clutched a young girl to her chest. She was bleeding out. Beyoncé stopped it. She organized everything, Sarah added, her voice firm despite the tension. Without her, we would have lost dozens more. She didn't overstep, she led when leadership was desperately needed. Matthias's jaw clenched. These testimonials are irrelevant. The issue is one of hierarchy and order. If we allow Omegas to assume authority whenever they see fit, the entire pack structure collapses. Structure that leaves wolves to die? Kale's sharp voice cut through the chamber. That sounds like a structure worth collapsing. Several elders bristled, but before anyone could respond, a small sound interrupted the tension. A whimper. Phoenix pushed through the crowd, his golden eyes fixed on Beyoncé. He trotted across the chamber floor, completely ignoring the 7 powerful elders, and pressed against her legs. His small body trembled, and when Beyoncé knelt, he climbed into her arms, burying his face against her neck. The gesture was unmistakable. The Blackthorn heir, in front of the entire council, had chosen her. The chamber fell silent. Cade stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Beyoncé had never heard before, not just authority, but raw emotion barely contained. You want to talk about hierarchy? Cade said, his silver eyes blazing. About order and proper place? Then let's discuss how this pack's precious structure failed Phoenix's mother. Matthias's face darkened. That is not. She was struggling, Cade continued, his voice rising. Post-birth complications. Emotional distress. She needed help, but asking for it was seen as weakness. So the pack, your perfect hierarchy, ignored her suffering. Dismissed it. Until someone exploited that vulnerability and murdered her. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Many hadn't known the full truth of how Phoenix's mother died. My sister died because this pack values strength over compassion, Cade said, and now his voice shook with barely controlled rage. Because wolves like you taught her that needing help made her worthless. That vulnerability was shameful. That she should suffer in silence rather than admit she was struggling. He turned to face the elders fully, his massive frame radiating fury. And now you stand there, ready to punish the one wolf who embodies everything my sister needed. The one who sees value in protecting the vulnerable. Who acts with courage and compassion. Who saved 14 lives last night while risking her own. Cade moved to stand beside Beyoncé, his hand resting on her shoulder. Beyoncé didn't overstep. She rose to meet a crisis your system was failing to address. If that threatens your hierarchy, perhaps the hierarchy is the problem, not her. The silence that followed was absolute. Beyoncé could barely breathe, tears streaming down her face as the weight of Cade's words, his defense, his fury on her behalf, crashed over her. Elder Lyra, a woman Beyoncé hadn't heard speak before, leaned forward. The Blackthorn Alpha makes compelling points. We cannot ignore the lives saved, nor the bond Phoenix has clearly formed. She looked at Beyoncé with shrewd eyes. Perhaps it is time we reconsidered what strength truly means. This is unprecedented, another elder protested, but his voice lacked conviction. So was last night's attack, Lyra countered. And yet this Omega handled it with more leadership than many of our ranked wolves. She stood, her voice ringing with authority. I call for a vote. Should Beyoncé Reed be granted official rank and protection, or should she be punished for her actions? The elders exchanged glances. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. One by one, they voted. Elder Lyra. Granted. The next elder, an older man with kind eyes, granted. A third, reluctantly, granted. When it reached Elder Matthias, his face was stone. For a long moment, he said nothing, his cold eyes fixed on Beyoncé. Finally, through gritted teeth, granted. The vote was unanimous. Lyra smiled. Then it is decided. Beyoncé Reed, you are hereby granted the rank of Sanctuary Warden, Protector, and Healer of the Vulnerable. You will have full authority over medical crises and the care of orphaned or struggling pack members. You are under council protection. Any who harm you answer to us directly. The chamber erupted. Some in celebration, others in shock, a few in barely concealed anger. Beyoncé stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She had rank, authority, protection. She wasn't worthless anymore. Cade squeezed her shoulder, and when she looked up, the pride in his silver eyes made her chest tight. Told you, he murmured. You're stronger than you know. The ceremony was brief but powerful. Elder Lyra produced a silver band etched with healing symbols, the mark of a sanctuary warden. But instead of placing it herself, she handed it to Cade. The one who spoke for her should be the one to mark her, Lyra said, her eyes twinkling with something that might have been approval. Cade took Beyoncé's wrist gently, his fingers warm against her skin. The silver band slid into place, fitting perfectly. His thumb traced over it once, the gesture intimate despite the watching crowd. This is just the beginning, he said quietly, meant only for her. The celebration afterward was chaotic. Pack members approached to offer congratulations or grudging respect. The families of those she'd saved embraced her with tears and gratitude. Even some who'd scorned her before now looked at her with new eyes. Astrid stood at the back of the crowd, her beautiful face twisted with fury. But when Cade's cold gaze found her, she turned and fled. The message was clear, Beyoncé was untouchable now. As the crowd began to disperse, Cade appeared at Beyoncé's side. Phoenix dozed in her arms, exhausted from the day's events. Walk with me, Cade asked, his voice low. There's something I need to say. Just us. Beyoncé's heart stuttered. The way he looked at her, intense, almost vulnerable, made her mouth go dry. Alone, she asked. Alone, he confirmed. Under the moonlight. If you're willing. The invitation hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. This wasn't just a walk. This was something more. Something that could change everything between them. Beyoncé settled Phoenix with Rowan, who smirked knowingly as he took the sleeping pup. Take your time, the healer said, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what was about to happen. The night air was cool as Beyoncé followed Cade out of the village, toward the forest edge where moonlight filtered through ancient trees. Her new silver band caught the light, a constant reminder that her life had transformed beyond recognition. Cade walked slightly ahead, his shoulders tense. Whatever he wanted to say, he was nervous about it. The realization made him seem almost human. This powerful alpha who defended her so fiercely, now uncertain. They reached a clearing where the full moon hung like a silver coin against velvet darkness. Cade stopped, turning to face her, and the intensity in his expression stole her breath. Beyoncé, he started, then stopped. Tried again. There's something I need you to understand. His hand reached out, fingers ghosting along her jaw with devastating gentleness. From the moment I saw you protecting Phoenix, I knew you were different. Special. And every day since, that certainty has only grown stronger. He stepped closer, and Beyoncé's heart thundered against her ribs. What I'm trying to say is, the chosen bond. Cade led her beyond the clearing, through a path she'd never noticed before. The trees opened onto a cliff overlooking the entire valley. The village below glowing with scattered firelight, the forest stretching endlessly in every direction, and above it all, the moon casting everything in silver and shadow. It was breathtaking. I used to come here when the weight of leadership became too much, Cade said quietly, standing at the cliff's edge. It reminded me there's more to the world than pack politics and bloodshed. Beyoncé moved beside him, careful to keep space between them despite the magnetic pull urging her closer. It's beautiful. I brought you here the first night, Cade admitted, his voice low. After we'd settled you in. I stood right here and tried to convince myself that bringing you to the pack was purely tactical. That you were just Phoenix's caretaker. Nothing more. He turned to face her, moonlight illuminating the vulnerability in his silver eyes. I've been lying to myself ever since. Beyoncé's breath caught. Cade. I watched you, he continued, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. Every morning when you fed Phoenix in secret. Every time you showed him gentleness he desperately needed. I watched you protect him from that coyote, this tiny omega standing against a predator twice her size with nothing but determination and love. His voice roughened. And I knew then that I'd never meet anyone like you again. You were watching me for 3 weeks, Beyoncé whispered, remembering. You could have taken Phoenix any time. Why did you wait? Because I needed to be sure, Cade said simply. That you weren't just kind once. That your compassion wasn't an act. That what I saw in you was real. He stepped closer, and Beyoncé's heart hammered. And every day, you proved it was. Every single day. I'm scared, Beyoncé confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I'm terrified, Cade. 3 years ago, this pack looked at me and decided I was worthless. They rejected everything I was. And even now, with this rank, with everything that's happened, part of me still believes them. Still thinks I'm not enough. Her voice cracked. What if they're right? What if I fail you? Fail Phoenix? What if I prove that I never deserved any of this? Cade closed the distance between them, his hands cupping her face with devastating gentleness. Then you fail. And we pick you back up. That's what pack means, Beyoncé. That's what this means. He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her skin. You will never stand alone again. I swear it on my life, on my rank, on everything I am. You are not alone anymore. The words broke something open in Beyoncé's chest, the wall she'd built around her heart to survive 3 years of isolation. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief so overwhelming it felt like finally being able to breathe after drowning. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to be close to someone. How to trust that they won't leave. Neither do I, Cade admitted with a rough laugh. I've spent my entire life leading warriors, making tactical decisions, being the strong one who never falters. I don't know how to be vulnerable. How to admit that someone has become essential to me. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. But I want to learn. With you. A soft whimper interrupted the moment. Phoenix trotted into the clearing, his golden eyes moving between them with what could only be described as impatience. He sat directly between them, yipping insistently. Beyoncé laughed through her tears, dropping to her knees. Were you following us, you little troublemaker? Phoenix climbed into her lap, licking her face enthusiastically before turning to do the same to Cade when he knelt beside them. The pup seemed determined to keep them both close, his small body a bridge between them. Even he knows, Cade murmured, scratching behind Phoenix's ears. His other hand found Beyoncé's, fingers intertwining. He chose you first. Now I'm choosing you too. Not as an alpha command, he continued, his voice soft but certain. Not because of duty or obligation, but because when I imagine my future, you're in it. You and Phoenix and this life we could build together. He squeezed her hand. If you'll have me. If you'll take a chance on an alpha who's still learning how to put feelings into words. Beyoncé looked at him, really looked at him. This powerful, intimidating warrior who'd defended her before the council, who'd watched over her for weeks before revealing himself, who held Phoenix with such tenderness and faced down rogues with brutal efficiency, who stood before her now, offering not just protection, but partnership, choice, love. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I choose you too. The bond snapped into place like coming home. It wasn't the forced, dominant connection she'd heard described in alpha-omega pairings. It was warm and gentle, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She felt Cade's presence in her chest, steady and strong, and knew instinctively that he felt hers too. The connection hummed between them, not demanding or overwhelming, but perfect. Right. Cade pulled her close, Phoenix squeaking in protest before settling between them. My pack, Cade murmured against her hair. Both of you. Mine to protect. Mine to cherish. Ours, Beyoncé corrected softly. We're a family now. The words settled over them like a blessing. Family. Not just pack, not just duty, but something deeper. Something chosen and earned and absolutely unshakable. They sat together on that cliff for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Cade told her about his sister, about the guilt he carried for not saving her. Beyoncé shared her rejection story, the pain finally losing its sharp edges in the safety of his presence. Phoenix dozed between them, occasionally waking to demand attention from both. When they finally walked back toward the village, dawn was breaking over the horizon in shades of pink and gold. Phoenix trotted ahead, his tail wagging with the confidence of a pup who knew he was loved and protected. Beyoncé carried him when he got tired, his warm weight familiar and comforting in her arms. Cade walked beside her, close enough that their arms brushed with every step. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally, and neither of them let go. As they entered the village, pack members emerged from their homes. One by one, they stopped to watch the procession. The Blackthorn Alpha, the newly appointed sanctuary warden, and the heir they'd both sworn to protect. And one by one, they bowed their heads. Not in submission, but in respect. In recognition of what Beyoncé had become. Not despite being Omega, but because of everything that made her who she was. The compassion, the courage, the unwavering determination to protect those who needed her. Elder Lyra stood on her porch, a knowing smile on her face. Sanctuary Warden, she called out. Welcome home. Home. The word resonated in Beyoncé's chest, in the bond she shared with Cade, in the sleeping pup in her arms. She'd spent 3 years believing she didn't belong anywhere. That rejection had defined her forever. But standing here, with Cade's steady presence beside her and the pack's respect surrounding her, she finally understood the truth. She hadn't been rejected. She'd been redirected. Toward a purpose greater than she'd ever imagined. Toward wolves who saw her value. Toward a family she'd chosen, and who'd chosen her in return. Cade squeezed her hand, his silver eyes warm with pride and love and promise. Ready for the rest of our lives? He asked quietly. Beyoncé looked at Phoenix, at the village that had become home, at the alpha who'd seen past her supposed weakness to the strength beneath. With you, she said, smiling through happy tears. I'm ready for anything. And as the sun rose fully over the valley, bathing everything in golden light, Beyoncé Reed, former reject, current sanctuary warden, chosen mate of the Blackthorn Alpha, walked into her new life with her head held high and her heart finally completely whole.